Hi, I'm Scott. I'm a Quiet Place fan.
Hi, I'm Senthil, and I'm a Bird Box fan.
So the two of us have decided since we disagree, we're going to start watching as many horror movies as we can and come up with a new way of rate them. Come join us.
It's birthday time!
Simple, it's good to see you again.
Good afternoon. Good to see you too, Scott.
Hey, normally we tape on a Monday, but we're taping on a Thursday night. Care to tell our listeners what the heck happened?
I broke my foot uh, over the weekend, so I'm in a wheelchair right now and working on getting a cast. So that's why we're delayed a little bit this week.
Was it from a saw trap that you were able to get free of?
I'll just say that I tripped over my own feet.
Well, I've got to tell you, I'm actually excited for this week because one of the movies I really love and I'm looking forward to speaking with you about. The other one was just Nick Cage. So why don't we just start off with Nick Cage in Willys Wonderland because I'm going to tell you right now, I'm a Nick Cage fan. I liked Ghost Rider. I know most people didn't. I loved both Ghost Riders. I'm sorry. Nick Cage, Crazy Cage. That's the way to go. I loved Mandy. I love The Color of Space. When Nick is allowed to be Nicolas Cage and he's just, crazy, they are good movies. Willys Wonderland, though. So before I go, I got to know, first of all, what the hell did you think of Willys Wonderland?
I will say that Willys Wonderland was actually my Bird Box. I enjoyed it.
Did you?
Oh, yes, I did. I loved it for several reasons. There's a long-running belief that the superstars of movies are actors who are just themselves and who don't really play a character, but Nicolas Cage being Nicolas Cage is what this movie's about. And what's fascinating is I don't think he says a single word.
None.
And it works fantastically.
So I thought the same thing. And but one of the things I thought it's a complete ripoff of Five Nights at Freddy's, the video game. I don't know if you've ever played it or seen it. Okay, so this guy is hired to be a security guard.
I see.
And he's stuck in this place for 5 days and the animatronics are coming alive. Right. So he's there to guard it over a 5-day period. This was the same thing, kind of a ripoff. What I will say, though, is it allowed Nick Cage to be Nicolas Cage. In one of the things that I just thought was bizarre, like the whole fascination with this pinball machine during it.
And the sodas.
What the hell was that all about?
I don't know, but that worked in the Nick Cage movie because he was taking a break right in the middle of murdering a possessed animatronic animal. His alarm would go off and he'd go take his 10-minute work break to play pinball and drink sodas. I thought that was added to the quirkiness.
Well, what was so quirky about it was he would know these things were attacking this. And of course, every movie, a group of teenagers breaks into the place while he's cleaning it, right? So let me just drop that because there's nothing that's going to surprise anybody by that. But what I like, this thing would be attacking these teenagers and he'd look at his watch and the timer would go off
and just leave.
He just left. And he would go take his drink, set the clock for, I think it was like 10 minutes, play pinball, and then come back and do Nicolas Cage Kick-Ass. It was really weird.
He is best when, just like you said, when the writers and the directors let him be Nick Cage. And it works really well.
Did you read anything of it? Did you go and read anything about what they did there?
I did, because it was so unusually fascinating. I did. It was one of those movies where I went and dug up the director, the writer, the background to the movie. Loved it.
Yeah. One of the things I thought was interesting is that in an interview, they said, this is what a video game hero does. You don't hear any words from them most times. They're just going in and kicking ass and taking names, or taking names and kicking ass, whichever way you want to do it. I think, what was that from the John Carpenter film? I'm here to kick ass and chew bubblegum, and I'm all out of bubblegum. That really is the synopsis of this movie. Okay, so that being said, it's a kids pizza parlor, fun place, sort of a
Yep.
Chuck E. Cheese thing. The animatronics come to life. What made you feel that this fits in that genre of horror? What was the emotional response that you had that made you go, yeah, this fits?
Because there are some horrific moments in it. For horror movies, it's representative and shows a lot of blood and guts that you'd expect to see. There's possession, it has supernatural elements in it. And it has the classic kids making really stupid decisions. Although in this case, there's one kid who makes a typical stupid decision and gets the entire bunch in trouble.
Yes.
And then your hero, your anti-hero that comes in and just does his thing. So those elements made it a good horror movie for me. It was entertaining. I don't know that this would have worked if any other actor than Nick Cage was in it.
I don't think it would have, unless you had Keanu Reeves, right? Because Keanu can
That
play
would have
that
worked.
kind of, that would have worked. And there is a sex scene in it. So those of you who are looking for a horror movie with a sex scene, there is one in there. It's short-lived, but
it's a very short sex scene. I don't know if it had a lot of sexiness in it, but there was one element of this I thought that was unique that I liked about it that, resulted in me having hey, this is more like a Bird Box, in that I enjoyed it. Chucky is just a doll. I mean, at the end of the day, it is just a doll. And Nicolas Cage's character in this movie, these are a bunch of animatronic animals. How difficult can it be to destroy possessed animatronic,
Yep.
And he does. And it makes that case that, you know what, these are not that scary. The kids may get themselves, in trouble, but someone who's paying attention should be able to deal with them easily.
Well, and I'm going to say that was one of the reasons why. So I'm going to say this is a mid film for me. It falls between Quiet Place and a Bird Box, because there were elements of it that were totally Bird Box. There's elements that were totally Quiet Place. But the elements that I liked, Simple, was this whole idea. They're possessed by the serial killer people in animatronics. And how hard is it to kill an 8-foot robot, right? This thing. My favorite animatronic, though, was the female ninja thing. She was totally badass. So when you're watching this, watch for that, because I thought she was a really cool character. So I want to move from this one, because I think this next one is going to be an interesting debate, Cynthia, because our next film that you handed over to me was Bone Tomahawk. And like Nicolas Cage, Cynthia, I am a huge Kurt Russell fan.
Absolutely.
There's been, if he did another Escape from San Francisco or something, I'd be the first guy in line to watch this. I'm interested to hear from you before I say anything. Did you classify this as a horror movie, and why?
I did classify this as a horror movie. In fact, I thought, I don't know if this was the intention. This to me was a horror version, or maybe a more horrific version of The Searchers. If you've ever seen The Searchers with John Wayne.
Wow. Yes. You know what? Simple. I didn't even think of that. Damn. Yeah.
It's very similar, except John Wayne doesn't run any cannibals. And that's what, to me, made this a horror movie. It's an interesting horror Western because a significant percentage of the movie is your traditional travel Western. There isn't a lot of horror going on until you get to the very bitter end, and there's just, back-to-back packed with cannibal, cave dwellers. So that element and the level of violence and gore was pretty intense. And it gets very serious very fast in terms of the danger to the party that's searching for the missing woman. So those elements definitely makes this a horror Western.
So this is, I think this will be the first time I think we've disagreed in a while. And I love the movie. I love Bone Tomahawk because I love Westerns. And to me, Bone Tomahawk is a Western. And it's kind of like they went, oh, wait, we were supposed to do something. And so at the end, you have a couple of scenes that are violent. One of them, but but even in that, even in the scene that I think was just, oh, I think we would classify as over the top, where they've got the guy hanging upside down in a V. There's no blood. You see no blood splatter during that. And so it is so obvious that it's a dummy, right? So that there's not even any moans from it. I went back and watched it twice, that scene, because I'm going, am I missing something? But there's no blood splatter. There's nothing, right? There's nothing taking place. And
wasn't he screaming at the time though?
He does before they flip him around, and then now suddenly you're working with this obviously a dummy, and it lost me there. I still, and when I say it lost me as a horror film, right? It lost me as a Western that has a pretty brutal ending. Absolutely. But I don't, have you ever seen the Burrowers? The Burrowers. Some of the old, Clint Eastwood movies with the final big fight where 40 guys get nailed, with the gunfire and all that. I felt the same way in this. There was a couple of scenes, one including a flask, that I went, whoa. But if you stop and look at that and go, the one scene with the cleaving and then the other scene with the flask, that was it. That's it. The rest is kind of a Western. It's even when the cannibal takes the shotgun and is putting up next to Kurt Russell and can't figure out how to work the weapon. To me, it was very Western. And I went, this is the first movie that I've seen since we started doing this, that I went, I don't feel comfortable calling that. I would call it a quiet place because I love the film and I love the actors. Patrick Wilson, I love him in The Conjuring. I thought he did great in this film, right? As the husband whose wife has been taken away. Kurt Russell, you can't go wrong with. I just couldn't get to a point where I went, this is horror. It didn't take me to that place. The emotional response wasn't there.
Interesting, because how is this different than Wrong Turn? Very similar movies.
So for me, what was different about this and Wrong Turn was Wrong Turn, actually, you start building on that base, and there's this violent episode that takes place when they are taken. And then the ending is just wild off the cuff. But there's this and remember, I didn't call Wrong Turn this Wrong Turn. I think I called it more of a Bird Box and A Quiet Place. Mm-hmm. But the reason I think there was a difference there is because although Wrong Turn has this buildup, it was based on stupid people doing stupid things. Those kids going to a Confederate site along the Appalachian Trail. They see people in the woods and they go, oh, okay, no big deal. They keep going. This movie built up its intensity to a point, and then I felt it let me down at that point. So, I expected something more. Now, I will say the way that these cannibals talk to each other, the way that Patrick Wilson figures that out and he uses that, brilliant. Loved it. It was like an adventure Western with a touch of terror at the end.
So are you saying that it wasn't horrific enough to qualify as anything more than a violent Western?
I'd almost say, to me, it was a violent Western at the end. We had our touches of violence in there, because there's been what was it? Not 310 to Yuma, but Hostels that just recently came out. Over the top violence and some of that. I mean, the headshots and stuff like that in that movie were way more over the top, gruesome and violent than Bone Tomahawk. The act of what was taking place, because it was cannibals, is, I think, the only tie that would classify this into that horror genre, because it was cannibals. Now, if this had been, and they called them troglodytes, right?
Yep.
And so I think it was a new take on a Western. And this is I think the third time I've seen it, because I truly just love the film. I love that intensity buildup, Simple.
Yeah.
But I have a hard time classifying it as horror.
That's an interesting discussion there on what qualifies as horror.
Yes.
And those are elements that over time, I think I'd love to gradually investigate, because to me, the reason I call this a horror, as I mentioned, is because they're cannibals. And the violence is over the top. Also elements where poisoning through whiskey, which is very Western, traditional Western themes.
That wasn't, they didn't poison through whiskey.
It's a whiskey flask.
It's a whiskey flask, but it was opium in the flask.
Right. Even that comes back. That the scene with the flask when it happens to it is a. So in those sense, there were elements that I thought were traditional Western. The travel and all the danger they go through while they're traveling, the determination of the characters and the husband to follow through made it a Western. But it was
this. I think that this is where I would be fascinated to hear your thoughts on. Would you, if you take the actors that were in the film, leave the cannibalism at the end, take the actors out of the film, put B-level actors in this film, would it have still been a horror?
It would definitely, I think in that case, we would have called it a very low-grade horror movie that wasn't well done. The opposite happens in this case because there's some great actors in it. The director did an outstanding job. The script is great. The dialogue is great. Yes, the interaction with the characters is great. You get the payoff, as in a traditional Western. So I still think we would have called it horror if there'd be great actors. It's an outstanding horror Western because the actors were outstanding and the direction was outstanding.
Yeah, I just can't get my head wrapped around that this was a horror film. It's a lot like Unhinged was for me. Yeah. Unhinged was like the suspense thing that I could imagine myself in that place. Well, your wife just recently had an unhinged moment, right?
Absolutely.
So I can see horror in that. I can go, okay. For me, Bone Tomahawk was just a really great Western where they said, hey, let's put cannibals at the end. And there's this couple of moments where you go. But ask you one more question. If they had not shown the scene of the cleaving and just the scene with the whiskey flask, would that have changed your mind?
No, because you don't see cannibals in a traditional Western. The cannibalism, that's what I think is a tipping factor. You wouldn't have that. The minute you go cannibalism, it's unnatural and unexpected. And that, I think, is what swings it into.
I would have to agree. I mean, we've lost several neighbors from, well, I won't say where they've gone, but, they make a damn good pot roast. So, okay, well, I think this is going to be one that we're going to agree to disagree on because it's just one of those films that I loved it. I'm with you. Love the film. I just can't wrap around the horror thing of it. All right, for those of you watching, you can always jump over to offlon.org, OFLON.org, pick up our blog. We're working on that right now on a new and better way to actually do that. So you're getting more information quickly through that. Give us a little time. We're working through it. Senthil, I'll see you next week.
Looking forward to it.